All right, we are live. Welcome, everybody, to the Gunner Technology Livestream, a weekly tech talk for non-techies and techies alike. I'm your host, Jerry Merkins. With me is CEO of Gunner Technology, Cody Swan. What's up, Cody?
What's going on?
How's the weather? How's the weather down there? How's the ocean looking? Choppy?
Actually, the oceans, the waves are ripping, but other than that, it's just hot as hell.
Business as usual.
Hot and humid as hell, basically.
Are you getting anything from Florence?
A lot of news coverage.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Endless updates to Florence's path. Yeah. Where's she heading now? Is she heading to Georgia?
I guess it's gonna hit. It's gonna hit. I guess I saw this morning that it was gonna hit like North Carolina and then like jut down.
I can't keep track of this thing.
But
it's tricky. It's a tricky hurricane.
North Carolina.
It's only a 2 now, huh?
What's that?
It's only a 2.
Yeah, and the media is in full spin trying to justify their coverage of a 2. They're like, oh, just because it's a 2, that could mean it's more dangerous than if it was a 3. And I was like, explain that to me.
You know, I think I've gotten burned so many times at this point, and yeah, I still got burned by Florence, but I don't know why I believe them when they say it's going to be a 5 when it makes landfall.
I don't know. All the time they say that. This is the storm of the century. It's going to be a category 5, blah, 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 blah. And then without fail, it dissipates when it hits.
There's a weird economic incentive going on there because they need to pump that up to the storm of the century to get coverage. But then it peters out to a 1, and I guess everyone just forgets.
Yeah.
There's no big deal because everyone just forgets that they constantly hype these things up.
It's a weird thing, or it's such a weird thing. Storm coverage is such a very, very odd thing because basically what they should say is like they should cover like a 1,000-mile radius. Be like, it's going to hit within this 1,000 miles. Keep an eye on it, and that's really it because that's all they freaking know. I mean, every single time they think they're going to know exactly this cone of uncertainty, but the cone of uncertainty without fail triples in size by the time it makes landfall.
I'm going to write a stern letter to Jim Cantori and let him know how upset I am with their coverage of this. Well, moving off of hurricanes and moving on to the business side of the show, we have a winner of our Country Store giveaway. Country Store is a lifestyle brand for anyone who loves the outdoors. Visit them at countrystoreoutfitters.com. The winner of our Country Store giveaway is from your neck of the woods, actually. We've got Norm S. from Fort Lauderdale, Florida.
I thought you were going to say it was Florence H.
Florence T. Hurricane. You've got a Country Store hat heading your way. But Norm, you got a Country Store hat and copies of our 4 ebooks heading your way. So enjoy those while you watch Florence make her way across the United States. And while you're on our Facebook page signing up for the Country Store giveaway, go ahead and answer our question of the week, which this week's question of the week was awesome because there really was no good option.
Would you take less money if you could work remotely?
That was last week's question, wasn't
it? This week's question. Sorry,
I thought this week's question was
this week's question. The new one coming up is: who do you trust more, Google or Facebook?
Wait, I thought that was last week's question. Did you just post that?
I just posted this week's question.
It's hard to keep track sometimes what the question of the week is. Wait, last week's question of the week was: would you take less money? I thought we did that last week. Did we not have a question this week?
No, we did.
Okay, all right. I'm losing my mind. So what were the results? Would people take less money to work remotely?
Yeah, 100%. We got 100% saying yes.
Okay, that makes sense.
Which is amazing because we haven't had 100% on anything.
Yeah, I guess it's sort of the wave of the future. Nobody leaves their house anymore, so why not work from home?
And again, we intentionally leave these things vague because we're like the media and we do things to stoke conversation. So we didn't say exactly how much less money, to be fair.
And I wonder, are you sure this wasn't a question? Didn't we talk about this? But how much less would you take? Because I remember saying I would take half as much to work remotely.
Yeah, we did talk about it, but I did post it just before the show last week.
Okay, all right. I'm just completely forgetting what. So what is? We already spoilers. What's the question of the week for next week?
Who do you trust more, Google or Facebook?
And that's the one where I don't know that there's a good option.
Yeah, and it's funny because it's really weird. I understand the kind of distrust, for lack of a better word, among the advertising platforms in terms of Google's advertising platform and Facebook's advertising platform. But Google's been in the news this week for political bias against conservatives. And I guess
Didn't they
Breitbart.
just send a sign to the congressional hearing?
Yeah, no. The media.
No, they wouldn't send some. They wanted to send like an intern to the. They said like Facebook sent Sheryl Sandberg, right? And Twitter sent that guy.
Yeah, Jack Dorsey. And
then Google was like, we're gonna send. He's a really good intern. He's been here for 4 months and he's doing a great job.
So Google was going to send their head attorney, their lead counsel, and Congress did not want that. So Congress made a point of setting up an empty chair for Google and putting that
so
sign
petty.
there, which is so passive aggressive.
It's amazing.
I mean, Benjamin Franklin is rolling over in his grave.
Oh my gosh. They should just put a poster board cutout of Sergey Brin.
So, okay, we could do a whole show on this because I guess Sergey is basically a recluse at this point.
Is it a soft G, Sergey?
Sergey?
Serge. We'll call him the Serge.
Yeah, so Serge is basically a recluse at this point, and I was reading an article that he spends most of his time on his private island in the Caribbean, probably fighting off hurricanes, and investing in futuristic technologies such as flying cab companies. So he's basically doesn't have much to do with Google at all at this point and doesn't live in Mountain View. He's across the country as far away as you can get from Google.
So he's like Tyrell from Blade Runner. He's just holed up and playing chess remotely.
Pretty much.
Is he taking less money to work remotely?
I would imagine so. I think his salary is $1. So I don't know if he can get much less than that. But there's so much news about Google this week that we could do a whole show on about it. But what prompted this question was, so Google's been getting hammered again for this conservative bias. And it's to the point where Breitbart posted this video, I guess, that a Google employee took of kind of the days after or the day after the election.
Yeah, I did see that. Yeah.
And
where it was like a funeral.
Yeah, it was. And the thing that's so weird is that, what am I trying to say? People are so wrapped up in politics that they think that it invades every aspect of someone's life. What I mean by that is clearly Sergey and Larry, who are immigrants and very left-leaning, are not going to want Donald Trump to win the election. Same thing goes for a lot of engineers on the West Coast that lean liberal. They're not going to they're going to prefer someone other than Donald Trump to win the election. But to make the leap from we want someone other than Donald Trump to win the election, or we lean Democrat, to the conclusion that because we lean Democrat, we're going to purposely skew our product against conservatives is just such a stretch in logic. I don't even know where to begin, because I think everyone, or 99% of people, have a preference as to who they want to win a given election. And I would say the amount of people who actually let that affect their decision-making process in things unrelated to politics is minuscule. But so many people let politics consume their life that if you are a Democrat, then you have to be against anything that would help conservatives. It's just really weird.
Yeah, we should do a whole pop-up episode about that. We haven't done one in a while. Maybe we'll do one immediately after this episode. But the topic du jour for this episode is another case study. So this is part 7 of our 10-part series, where we're going to go through case studies for all of these applications that we've built over the many, many years that Gunner Technology has been around. And this week's actually really cool. So this week we're going to be talking about our Salesforce integration with JIRE, who's a client of ours down your way as well. So I'm not sure where to start. Maybe give an overview of what JIRE is and how. Let's start with what JIRE is.
Okay, so JIRE, or John's Island Real Estate Company, is a real estate firm, real estate company that exclusively sells property within Johns Island, which is a very high net worth area community just north of actually where I am right now. It's about 45 minutes north of where I am right now. It's on the water, and it's like a beachfront community.
It's got an awesome golf course. I think they're hosting the US Amateur, or they just
really?
did.
Yeah, the golf course is really awesome. And I know because sometimes I go up there to meet with them, and you can't park a motorcycle anywhere visible. So I have to like park it behind the clubhouse for the golf course, like in a shed.
Oh my God.
So yeah, it's
I love HOAs.
What's that?
I love HOAs and their silly rules.
Exactly. So anyway, so JIRE they're not part of the HOA or anything like that, but they are a real estate company that sells properties within that community, and they've been doing so since the 60s, maybe even before. And the interesting thing about JIRE is, unlike Keller Williams or Remax or Berkshire Hathaway, all these real estate companies that leverage common technology provided by MLS, which is what does MLS stand for?
Listing service.
Multiple listing service. So it's offered by the Association of Realtors as a software platform to kind of manage your listings and communicate about your listings and stuff like that. It's actually really terrible. I've used it before, and it's getting better, but it's kind of one size fits all technology, which always leans toward the lowest common denominator, and it's pretty expensive to pay for as well. So JIRE elected not to use that, and so we end up building a lot of the functionality that MLS would provide for them. And so, and then we go above and beyond and provide functionality that MLS wouldn't provide for a client. And one of those pieces of functionality was integration with Salesforce. And if you don't know what Salesforce is, it's the largest. This is going to be one of those rabbit hole type things. If you don't know what Salesforce is,
tell the folks at home what Salesforce is.
It's the largest provider of CRM software in the world.
Tell the folks at home what a CRM is.
CRM is customer relationship management software.
Okay.
So customer relationship management software basically helps you track relationships, and it pervades across industry. So if you're in the financial industry and you're a financial advisor and you're trying to get a new client, you add all these people into CRM, and then you kind of track the status of those people from like contacted to interested to client. And then once they're a client, it's like it manages your relationship and says, hey, you should follow. It's been a month since you've contacted Cody. You should contact Cody. You leave notes and everything about that. Same thing with like a Salesforce, and not the Salesforce product, but like a software sales team. So if they're trying to sell software packages, they may track how close they are to a sale to a given company. For real estate, Salesforce has a offering called Property Base. And so Property Base, again, offers a lot of the same tools that MLS would offer, but much better. So you have things like contact management. So if you're a real estate agent, you can easily one button press and send info to one of your clients about a given listing that is in Property Base. So that's kind of a high level overview of going from Salesforce CRM to Property Base.
And so what was the key integration point between Salesforce and JIRE?
Yeah, so like we said, we've built a lot of the tools that MLS would provide for JIRE. And obviously one of those things is the ability to manage listings. And so right now, JIRE uses an open source platform built on an open source technology. So they're using something called Refinery, which is an open source platform, an open source content management system that's built on top of Ruby on Rails to manage their listings. So they'll go change the status of a listing from for sale to sold. They'll change the price. They'll change the square footage. They'll add photos. They'll change the description, all that kind of stuff. So that's been sitting in their that's hosted on AWS. We use Elastic Beanstalk to host that, which is kind of another case study. But that data had to get into property base somehow. And the way property base suggests you do things is that you use their database as the source of record, and you have your technology pull from their database using a REST-based API.
Did they have a SOAP API at one point?
Absolutely. Salesforce definitely had a SOAP API.
And so the idea being that they would be the overlords of the data, and you would have to just constantly pull the data down from them as opposed to storing it on your end.
Exactly, which is a waking nightmare because they're using the data for their agents. We're using the data for public consumption, and we're making complex queries on that data. And they had a REST-based API, which means you get the data that they provide and with the queries they provide. And if you need to do queries, you're doing kind of N+1 lookups on the data by making more and more REST-based API calls, which quickly gets untenable.
Was there a fee per API call, or was it structured in any way? Because that seems to me like that would be a solid business decision on their part to say, hey, you have to use our API. By the way, you have to pay for our API the more you use it, and you're going to have to use it a ton.
I don't know if they have tiered usage for their API. I don't know. I do know that they have throttle limits in place, and I don't know if those limits are something based on the plan that JIRE picked or global throttle points on the on Salesforce / property base in general, because we've hit those limits trying to import data. When we were trying to import all the data, we had to kind of throttle how quickly we were using their API to insert the data because we were triggering their throttle points, which were saying, hey, you've made too many API requests in a minute. Like you can only make 1,000 a minute or 100 a minute or something like that. And so we've hit that point before. And again, I don't know if that's a hard throttle point or if that's a soft throttle point based on how much you're paying Salesforce.
So there was an initial massive import of the data. And then at that point, what is the integration? I guess the integration with Salesforce is more of an update integration.
Yep, exactly. So there was there was not one, there were several mass imports of data because it took a long while to match up the mappings correctly. So for example, I'm using a contrived example. I don't know if this is actually true, but it'll give you an illustration of how the problems we ran into. So in refinery, for example, you'd have a field for baths and then a field for half baths, right? So you could have 3 baths and then one half bath, right? And then on property based, they count it as a float. Like, so you would have baths 3.5 and you would store it as a float decimal number rather than 3 and then 1, right?
What if a house had 3 full baths and 3 half baths and it was 4.5? How would you know it was 3 and 3 instead of 4 and 1?
I don't think we ever encountered that particular problem.
Do houses have 3 half baths? Does that never happen? Maybe that never happens. I would think in a big house that would
happen. and again, I'm kind of using a contrived example. I don't know if that was an actual example, but so okay. One of the it was that type of stuff. And so they would have like in refinery, there would be a field for like property features, and the features in refinery would include location and sort of amenities. And then in property base, it was separated like amenities and location kind of thing. So the mapping was a nightmare to figure out. So we set up a repeatable migration, which if you're ever going to migrate a large amount of data, you better be able to do it very quickly and repeatably over and over and over again. And that was kind of what was frustrating about it is we set up this process where we could migrate the data in say an hour. But then we started hitting these limits. So something that it would take an hour, we had to artificially take 10 hours because, property base was limiting how often or how frequently we could make updates to their database.
So I guess they want that data. So
Right.
I guess it's in their best interest to throttle or do whatever they can
Right.
to keep that data from coming out. So then what's the integration going forward? Is there a real-time update push from JIRE to property base or vice versa?
Yeah, no, real time from JIRE to property base. So whenever a listing is saved on the JIRE side of things, we syndicate that data into property base and update the corresponding property base record.
And what architecture are we using for the syndication of that data? Is it within the app itself, or is there a separate background process that's coded differently outside of the code base?
Yeah, so when you think about it, a lot of things happen on JIRE's end when a listing is saved. When a listing is saved, we synchronize it to property base, as we just said. But we also check to see if any user of JIRE's application has favorited that listing. And if we do, we email them and say there's been an update to your favorite listing. Also, and way more complex, we check to see if that listing that was just saved is part of any saved search that is being watched. So as a user, I can search for homes under $1 million. Okay. And then I can save that search and get an alert when any new properties match that saved search. So then if a JIRE admin goes in and changes the price from a listing from $1 million to $900,000, that then enters that saved search. And we need to alert anyone who has saved that search that there's a new property that matches that saved search. So in order to do that in real time, when someone hits save, would be impossible because it would take about 4 minutes to tie up the server to do all those three things. Meanwhile, the operator, the admin, would just have to sit there and wait for that operation to complete. So what happens is those three things go into background processes that are managed via SQS on AWS. And we then have a
SQS being simple queuing service, right?
Yep, that's right. And then we have a worker processor. It's actually a whole other worker environment. It's a mirror environment of the front-facing server structure, and it's called the worker tier environment. And the worker tier environment just sits there and constantly checks SQS for background tasks to be run. And then if it finds one, it runs the background task. So basically what you have, the infrastructure we have, is a front-facing infrastructure that as a user, you has a graphical interface. You go there, you see listings and all that stuff. At the same time, we have the same exact environment that runs headless, meaning it has no front end to it. And it just sits there and checks constantly for any queue-based processes that need to be executed. And it executes those and removes them from the queue.
It's actually a really cool architecture, and it's something we've used on a number of applications, a number of our current applications, actually. So maybe just talk a second about, because we've been doing Rails for the better part of 2 decades now, and it's pretty sweet. I mean, it's still pretty sweet. So talk about how, I guess the purpose of Rails in this instance is to be able to update the application quickly, because especially in real estate, it's always a moving target and stuff always needs to be added. There's always new features to add, especially with API integrations. So talk about how Rails allows you to execute that, be able to update fast and be sort of nimble and dynamic.
Yeah, and so it's interesting, right? Like it's very relative, because when you're talking about Rails, when you're adding application features, you can do so very quickly, like very, very quickly, in comparison to other technology stacks. When you're talking about like content type additions, and what I mean by that is we're talking about managing real estate listings. Also, JIRE needs the ability to manage kind of like articles, pages, if you will. So they'll have like an about page, obviously, or a community page, or a employees page, things like those. Those are just very standard pages. And so Rails is pulling double duty in the fact that it's acting as a content management system and a real estate management system. And so you're right. When you look at, say, Rails versus MLS, which if you want to, for example, add a new feature to MLS that allow you to query by feature, like front patio, if that's not available in MLS already, good luck getting that feature added. And if it does get added, it's going to take a very long time. In Rails, we're talking about a couple iterations, meaning a week, 2 weeks to be able to add that data and then query on that data and then build a user interface to interact with that data. So it's very quick. And especially in comparison to those enterprise technologies, because it allows you to act nimbly, and actually also the way the migrations are built in, it allows you to roll back very quickly if something that was asked for is no longer needed or creates problems that weren't foreseen.
Might be a good opportunity to talk about Git and managing different environments and managing different branches on Git, and how that allows you to, it allows our team to sort of develop in parallel and not step on each other's toes. So talk about how the environments are managed on JIRE and basically on all of our other projects too.
Yeah, so I'm struggling for an analogy to illustrate what Git would be. So basically, each developer has their own copy of the code base for all our projects, but I'm speaking specifically about JIRE. So let's say that we get that feature request. JIRE wants to be able to query. JIRE wants to be able to present their users with a page that lists all listings with a front porch, with a front screen and porch. So we say, okay, great. And we go back to our ticketing system and we create a ticket with the details for that request. Our ticketing system gives us a number, call it 1001. So then one of our developers either usually chooses what they're going to be doing that week. So they'll choose, hey, I want to tackle 1001. Okay, great. So they take their copy of the code, which they have on their computer, and they do what's basically called, they create a branch. And so they'll call that branch 1001 to match the ticket number that they're working on. And so what they'll then do is they'll build out that feature on that branch, which again is exactly, it's a copy of the current live code base. But then after that, it's changed to add that feature, that 1001 feature. So the developer works on 1001 and tests it locally, make sure it's working locally, meaning on their computer, it works locally. When it's working on their computer locally, they merge it into another branch, meaning merge means they copy all the changes that they made onto the existing code. So they merge all their changes into the main branch, or the staging branch rather. And Git handles that almost always seamlessly. It automatically merges all the changes. So then they deploy that staging branch to staging. And they make sure that when I say staging is a mirror private environment of the public facing application setup. So it's something that is exactly the same, except for it has the new features that need to be tested on it. So then the QA team checks to make sure that feature 1001 works as intended while not breaking anything else. If that is so, then branch 1001 is merged into the main code base and deployed to the public facing website or web app.
It's a pretty good overview of Git and how it works. And I was trying to think of a real world analogy, and I don't really know that there is one, because it's a weird situation where people can be working on the exact same thing even at the exact same time, and Git will figure out how to merge it together. Or there might be a conflict, and then if there's a conflict, all you have to do as a developer is manually merge the code together yourself and then push it back up. So it's a pretty seamless system, and I don't know that there's a physical real world analogy. I was trying to think of like people wiring up electricity and plumbing at the same time, and trying to get those two to work together. But even that's not really a good analogy.
Yeah, it's really weird. And at the same time, we could have feature 1002, and I could be working on feature 1001. You could be working on feature 1002. We both independently test our branches on staging, and then I merge my changes into the main branch, and you merge your changes in the main branch, and Git automatically just takes the pieces from yours that are different and puts them into the main branch, and takes only the pieces that are different on mine and puts them into the main branch. And again, usually because you're working on different features, there isn't a need to go back and manually merge it. Git handles it all seamlessly for you. And that way you have parallel work without any fear of you overriding changes that I've been working on.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I think this Git thing has a real future. We have a ton of third-party integrations with all of our apps. So do you have any advice, any closing advice for people who are working with APIs and sort of best practices or stuff to avoid as they're building out their applications?
Well, you know what's interesting is we've been on this train for a little bit longer, but you mentioned SOAP, and what was it?
Simple Object Access Protocol.
Yes, and simple had no place in SOAP. But actually, before
our CoAP, really complicated Object Access Protocol, it doesn't have the same ring to it, I guess.
There was something. I was going through the history of APIs. It's called like COM.
CALM.
COM. COM. Yes. Okay, that was what it was. COM. So COM actually predates me. The COM APIs were pretty much going out the window when I got into software development, and SOAP was becoming in vogue. And so I can only tell you that COM was very complex and wasn't really made for the internet. And so then SOAP was kind of the first standardized API platform for doing API requests over the internet. Then it was replaced by very briefly RPC, which was basically just a remote procedure call, very, very short-lived. That was then replaced by REST, which is a JSON-based protocol, and now, which is also what Salesforce, the Salesforce integration we did with JIRE, that's a REST-based API.
And just broad overview, representational state transfer. You query explicitly for the exact object you want to retrieve, or objects plural, and it's sort of like it's a mapping between a database and an API call, basically.
Yep. And so now, which even Salesforce is moving to this now also, we have GraphQL, which, like you just said, REST will give you the objects you need. GraphQL basically gives you the exact data you need, regardless of which objects you're talking about. So, REST will give you a list of cars. GraphQL will give you the color of steering wheels across all vehicles. And
it takes, and you don't have to merge the data yourself. So you don't have to make an API call for neighborhood, house, car, or something like that. It like
right.
multiple objects at once, and then you're in charge of glomming the data together. You can just make a query for neighborhood, including this one house, including this one car in the driveway.
Right. Whereas with REST, you'd have to get a list of all cars and then filter that list manually on your end by neighborhood, and then get the steering wheel type for every car in that neighborhood. With GraphQL, you just query, give me all steering wheel colors in this neighborhood, and you got it. It's
and the big win there is it sort of limits the number of API calls you have to make. You can make one call instead of multiple calls at once.
Exactly, and that's what I was
becoming
saying.
More and more important as mobile technologies take off, where you really don't have the bandwidth to be making thousands of API calls. You want to just make one and get all the data at once.
Right. Like bandwidth is a big one, and then network connectivity. So basically, every time you make a REST-based call or an API call, you have to do what's called make the request over the wire. So if your application is sitting in Virginia and it makes a request to a server sitting in Oregon, there's what's called latency. And no matter how fast both sides of the connection are, there's that latency as the request travels the wire and then comes back over the wire. So that could be a second. So imagine you're making 50 requests. you're adding so much time to get the data you need, whereas in GraphQL, you're able to combine and get back exactly what you need and limit the number of times you have to go over the wire for data.
Yeah, with the additional addendum that, especially as everything gets more and more globalized, there's tons of folks who are still on really slow networks. So making fewer API calls on a really slow network is important for your app to function at all for a lot of people.
Yep, exactly. That's exactly right. It's and again, the ability to query is a big one too. You can actually put the query into your request, and it just, I'm sure it'll be replaced by something else, but right now it's
probably SOAP. It'll probably be replaced by SOAP.
We'll go back to COM, which COM was a C++ based API.
Oh, so you know it's
protocol. Good. So I'm sure there's some people out there who still love COM, as there, I'm sure there will be.
We just lost so many viewers. All of our COM viewers are storming out. Any closing thoughts on JIRE and Salesforce integration?
No, I look forward to talking more about JIRE, because there's been, we touched on a lot of things that a lot of the projects, from, the environment setup to the favorite listings to save search. There's actually a lot of complex things we're doing on a relatively, I mean, when you think about JIRE, it's a very regional, if not local business. However, it goes to show you that like there is some complex technologies that need to go into even like small businesses need to have kind of cutting edge technologies to keep up with competitors.
Yeah, honestly, we might have like a part 2, 10-part series on case studies, just because we've done so much. There's so much to talk about. It might be worthwhile just to sort of do a deep dive on even more stuff that we built. So I guess that's sort of TBD, but there is a ton to talk about with JIRE. But I guess that'll do it for this episode and JIRE's integration with Salesforce. Make sure to tune in next Thursday, 1 p.m. Eastern time for the next episode of the Gunner Technology Livestream. Hop on our Facebook page, sign up for the Country Store giveaway. Country Store is a lifestyle brand for anyone who loves the outdoors. CountryStoreOutfitters.com is where you can visit them. And while you're on our Facebook page, answer the question of the week for this week, which is, remind them again, Cody, what that is.
Who do you trust more, Google or Facebook?
That's a Sophie's choice right there.
And I decided to include a GIF of Mark Zuckerberg's face for the Facebook option.
That's going to sway votes. That's
I'm biased.
That is not good journalism.
I have a Zuckerbergian bias.
So make sure to check out our ebooks on Amazon, Kobo, iBooks, Barnes & Noble, anywhere else ebooks are sold. The podcast for this will be on iTunes. The blog will be on gunnertech.com. And keep an eye out for a pop-up episode, possibly right after we're done with this, on politics and search results. Or what would you even say? Social media and politics, the liberal bias in social media, or the conceived liberal bias in social media?
I guess that's exactly right. Yep, the perceived liberal
perceived,
bias.
Not conceived.
Yep.
Perceived.
The conceived liberal bias.
We conceived the bias that other people perceived. So keep an eye out for that pop-up episode, and check us out next Thursday, 1 p.m. Eastern time for the next episode of the Gunner Technology Livestream. I'm Derry. That's Cody. We'll see you next week.